Good Sunday and welcome to the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It's Sunday, May 3rd, 2020. And we're back here again to talk about all things politics. And also, we can't not talk about COVID-19. The numbers continue to rise and obviously is not the direction that we wanted to go in. So as always, I try to assemble a group of people to talk about that. And today, we have in our regular guest, Atkinson, a former political science professor over at North Carolina Central University. And I added a new person to our roster, Rob Schofield with North Carolina Policy Watch, to try to help make some sense of that. In the second block today, we're going to have some nurses who are working up in New York City, in the Bronx, as a matter of fact, at a hospital there treating COVID patients in the ICU. And then in the last segment, we have some doctors to talk about the impact long-term on the health and well-being and mental health of those healthcare professionals that are working in the COVID-19 response. Without wasting a whole lot of time, I want to go ahead and bring in our guests, Val Atkinson and Rob Schofield. Welcome to the deal.
Thanks, good to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. Val, let me start with you. The numbers just are not trending the way we expected them to. And I'm trying for the life of me to figure out how we're going to get our way out of this. Can you tell me what you're seeing as of today? How is this opening up of America going to work, or is it working?
I have fears because I have been watching several states. One in particular I have been paying close attention to, the state of Mississippi. Their governor just yesterday walked back his plan to open up the state due to protesters and due to a lot of advisors who said the economy is really going south and we need to do something right away. The problem is that the numbers say that cases and deaths have increased and spiked. And he's walking it back, and hopefully it's in the proper time frame that we can do something about it. All the experts tell us that if you stop the lockdown and your numbers increase, it could be more difficult trying to get back to where you are and reduce the cases and deaths at a later time. So for that reason alone, the message should be not too soon. The first order of business is to get control of the virus. And then once we control the virus, all deck, hands on deck, and let's tackle the economy. But if you go right out having the economy as your number one measure that you're going to try to put in place, and you forget about the virus, then the virus is really going to kill the economy.
Yeah. So Rob Schofield, I want to bring you into the conversation. The reason why I wanted you here is because we talked a little bit off mic that North Carolina had been doing pretty well. If you look at the large states, and a lot of times people forget North Carolina is a large state. We're in the top in the population. Right. We had numbers that were sort of towards the middle. Actually, there's a lot of states that have far less population weren't doing as well. And Roy Cooper seemed to have this thing under control. But we saw protests downtown on Friday, people armed protests demanding that things open back up. What is that going to do to Governor Cooper's response is he going to have to shift focus? Is he going to have to think about doing some things that he doesn't want to do to placate these folks who are protesting downtown?
He's been walking a real tightrope, it seems to me. He's been doing his darndest to listen to the science, to listen to his advisors, and bring us back as rationally and thoughtfully as possible, which means it's going to take some time. And there is this irrational protest. I just got word that there's actually the Beaufort County commissioners are going to try to pass some resolutions this week in which they're going to resolve that any directive from the governor is null and void. This is the same thing we saw in Gaston County with these folks who are, and I think what we saw from Governor Cooper is he's not taking the bait. He's not going to send in the National Guard or anything like that. At this point, he's relying upon the moral authority that he has. And the fact, frankly, that the overwhelming majority of the population, even Republicans, are generally supportive of the policies that he's been pursuing, which are indeed themselves really inspired by the Trump administration. I mean, these are basically what the Trump administration has said to do. It's not like he's got some radical left policies he's been implementing. So I think Val is absolutely right. We got to listen to the science. We got to try to stay calm. This is a miserable experience we're all going through, but the only thing that would make it worse is if we rush back too fast, and then we got 10 million people sick, and that's really going to put our economy permanently, or in the tank for years and years to come. We've got to somehow stay calm, stay the course. I think Governor Cooper's done a good job, but he's walking a real tightrope.
Well, Val, we talk about this all the time about, how corporate interests kind of run things. People don't want to acknowledge that, essentially American capitalism is the de facto religion in the United States, that money trumps everything. And we sort of have this hierarchy of saints in the American pantheon, right? The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, and now whoever is as rich now gets venerated as being, exactly how we should be. So you have these poor people who are fighting for rich people to be able to make money. Obviously, the economy has to work, but how do you see this playing out? Are these armed people really people that are have something to say, or are they trying to take advantage of the situation? And maybe they're white supremacists or some of those other groups that are trying to triangulate this issue and get to their race war that they've been trying to have.
I think first and foremost, Ed, they are ultra conservatives. They have in mind, first of all, a fear of having the economy impacted in a negative way that will have a negative impact on Donald Trump's campaign in November. I think that's where they're going. That's how they're motivated. And they are coming out with all of the things that motivate their base. They didn't have to come out with guns at a protest to show how badly they wanted the economy to start back up afresh. But this is another tactic that's used by that side to pander to the base whenever possible. One part of the base are the gun rights people, okay? So you go out there with a bunch of guns, you got their attention. Another part of the base happens to be people who have issues around the issue of race. And you didn't see a lot of non-whites out there protesting. So they do that. And from time to time, they'll usher in the word Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, along with the blacks, to talk about the employees that man these slaughterhouses and do the labor-intensive work to keep our food chain going, okay?
Yeah.
And that's pandering to those people on that side. So it's all about politics. It's all about pandering. It's all about keeping the base where you can count on them and they can count on you.
Yeah, I want to remind the viewers and listeners you're watching The Deal with Ed Clark, and I'm fortunate today to have Val Atkinson back in with me like I normally do. But we added someone today that I think is very important to know, Rob Schofield with North Carolina Policy Watch. Rob, let's talk about what's happening in North Carolina. We get viewers from all over the country and actually over the world to tune into the program. But I think North Carolina is sort of a bellwether. We talked a little bit about how it's a little bit different than the other southern states. And we have a significant population. We have been doing relatively well with this COVID response, whatever. Talk to me about the North Carolina legislature. There's some people there, Tim Moore, and David Lewis, and then also there's political races coming up, like for governor. There's a guy named Dan Forrest that's running for governor. What has the right been saying about COVID response in North Carolina, despite the fact that it's been going well?
They're in a tough spot in that respect because they'd like to figure out something to go after Governor Cooper with. They were already facing a tough row to hoe this fall and holding on to their majorities in the General Assembly. Basically, over the last decade, we've seen very conservative government driven by a very conservative General Assembly. You've mentioned some of the leaders of that movement. It hadn't been that successful, although we've had an economic recovery in North Carolina that's kind of mirrored the national recovery. It's hugely ineffective. Half of our counties have lost jobs since the Great Recession. There's a big chunk of our population that are employed in jobs that are now quickly going away because they're in hospitality, they're in restaurants, food service, retail. So they've got some real problems, and they're trying to figure out some way to capitalize on it, but they can't because they realize the public is demanding relief. So they've come together this week. There was a sort of compromise relief package that was passed at the General Assembly. It doesn't go nearly far enough. A lot of the battles we've been having over Medicaid expansion, over unemployment insurance, all those were sort of rejoined this week, and they really weren't resolved. So the Republicans are trying to figure out how to manage this. You talk about the fact that their base is out there waving Confederate flags and guns and saying, let's reopen. But at the same time, these legislators aren't opening up the General Assembly. They realize that they're at risk. We're all at risk if we have large gatherings. So I think they're smart enough to know. I mean, we don't see Trump out there plunging into crowds, shaking hands right now. They all know that the risk is still there. They're in a tough spot, but they're trying their best to sort of stick to their guns, as it were. They still are opposing
figuratively, right?
Yeah, they're opposing policies that would, basically require the people who have been benefiting from this economy for the last several years to pay for this relief that we're going to have to pursue. They are not expanding Medicaid. They're still sticking to this absurd argument that we shouldn't expand Medicaid in this state at a time when the need for it is going to be greater than ever. So they're sticking to their policies, but I think it may be a losing track for them to be pursuing over the coming months. But we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think so too. So Val, I think at some point in your career you may have worked at the Employment Security Commission. I think I recall, and one of the things that happened as soon as President Obama was out of office, you saw sweeping around the South and in the states that supported Trump was reducing unemployment benefits almost down to nothing, not livable amounts of money. And in this last recovery, or I guess in the third recovery legislation, they had some money for enhanced unemployment, an extra $600 or whatever, which will run out at some point. But there was expanded unemployment during the Obama recovery. And I think that really helped people. I wrote a piece about it a few weeks ago where, from my assessment, by giving people a longer amount of time, in the case, 26 weeks, and in some cases they had extended to a whole year, that you could get unemployment benefits at an enhanced amount under the Obama recovery. In this recovery, they're doing things piecemeal. What do you make of how these unemployment systems in Florida and Georgia have been minimized so much that there's not even a livable amount of money, but also that the systems are broken, and even with the enhanced amount, it's not enough to live on? Did the Republicans back themselves into a corner by doing this around the country? And how do you work your way out of this?
Well, first of all, that the states are the primary benefactor for all of the unemployment funding. And now we get into where the problem comes. The people who put the money inside of Employment Security Commission fundings they are the business persons, small businessmen, large business. They fund the Employment Security Commission through taxes. And they, from time to time, will lobby the governor. They will lobby the legislature. They'll put pressure on anyone they can to lower their taxes. This is going to determine in the long run how much money each person filing for unemployment compensation can receive. So it's a battle between the laid off worker and the business owner who has to pay the taxes to make things go for them. Now, what happened under Obama, because of the $750 billion that was laid out by the Congress, this was just one part of that. This $600 is a part of the $2.2 trillion package that has been approved this time. So in fact, neither Donald Trump nor Obama had a lot to do with the amount of money that ends up being. Of course, both of them had the authority to say, I don't agree, I'm protesting, I'm not signing, I'm not doing whatever. But I don't credit or blame either on that. What I am concerned about here is what you mentioned earlier, the amount of money that is going to run out soon, and whether or not the economy will be back up and become self-sustaining by then. I think the fear is that it won't, and the question is, what do these unemployed people do with families that have kids that may or may not be in school, and whether or not a place is open doesn't depend upon the protesters or the business owners as much as it does the employees and the customers. And we are forgetting about that sometimes, that it's the employees and the customers who will determine, because if employees say, I'm not putting at risk myself and ultimately my family to go back and work for you to open up a business.
Right.
And people like me and you and Rob are saying, I am not going to go to Bonefish, PF Chang's or wherever, just to take part of the ambiance there and take a risk of contacting COVID-19 and taking it back home to my family.
Yeah, that's too big a risk for me. I want you guys to hang on just a second. We're going to take a really quick break, and when we come back, we'll wrap up this conversation. You're watching The Deal with Ed Clark and our guest Rob Schofield and Val Atkinson. We'll be back in a minute, and we'll wrap up the conversation.
Happy birthday to you.
I've never done this before.
Happy birthday to you.
We're here for Precious.
Happy birthday, dear Precious.
Day 4.
You may not understand.
Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, this is chapter 32.
And welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. And fortunately, today we have Rob Schofield in with us from North Carolina Policy Watch and Val Atkinson from Foxy 107, 104's Connections, and a whole bunch of other stuff. He's the author of multiple books. Rob Schofield, you can find him almost every day on North Carolina Policy Watch's website, giving us very useful information. He has these little small tidbits, but they're packed with facts, and I recommend people go to North Carolina Policy Watch. We'll have a link out on the webpage so you can get there. I think it's must reading. I stop there every day to look at something, not only about North Carolina, but just the progressive movement, people who I think are thinking the right way, and very thoughtful writing by Rob Schofield and others on North Carolina Policy Watch. So in the meantime, let's finish up this conversation. Rob Schofield, I get a sense that Donald Trump has made the decision that he's going to go as far as he can on his approach to this, because we know he never moderates. He's all 100% Donald Trump is right all the time. And one of the things he said a few weeks ago is that he had ultimate authority. He can make people do whatever he wants to, whatever. Obviously, he backtracked from that and tried to throw everything back on the states. Let's talk about North Carolina for a second. How do you think North Carolina is situated to deal with all of this? Val was talking about unemployment insurance. we made some modifications in our unemployment insurance program here in North Carolina that I think negatively impacted people. Trump has tried to force people in the meat processing industry to go back to work without protections. And North Carolina is one of those places that has a large meat processing industry. I think there's probably as many pigs around here as there are North Carolinians. Talk to me about how you think North Carolina is situated to handle the federal response, which I think is a non-response.
Yeah.
But how is North Carolina situated? How are we going to come out on the other side of this?
Well, I think, so far so good, but I think Val has highlighted the fact that we've got some real challenges coming. If the folks who are demanding to reopen things, just force it to happen, we're going to have some real problems. I think if people listen to the sound advice that's coming from the Cooper administration, we have a real chance to, make this as painless as possible, to have a fairly gradual, safe reopening. But the other thing, I think, even under the best of circumstances, we have to keep in mind, there are going to be spikes to this thing. A lot of this, the reason we've taken this approach is not because we really think we can eliminate or eradicate the virus. It's merely to protect our healthcare system so that it's not completely overwhelmed with sick people. So it's going to be a long slog. We're really hopeful that there's going to be progress in treatment, in some kind of a vaccine in the foreseeable future. That's really the ultimate hope here. In the meantime, we're not going to get back to what we all know as life as normal for a substantial period of time. The new normal is going to be here for several months. I think North Carolina is in a better spot than a lot of places. I think, as you put it, we kind of stayed under the radar. Georgia, my God, they've got, the governor tries to reopen, then Trump's yelling at him for reopening too soon. I think let's just not get into a public battle with Trump. That's probably not very productive. I think right now, there's hope, there's cause for optimism, but it's going to take a lot of attention and hard work going forward.
Yeah. It's real sober though when you think about it. But before we end, this is your first appearance with us, either on Connections or on the deal. Tell me a little bit about North Carolina Policy Watch, what you guys do,
I really
where we can find your stuff, and all those things around there.
We're at ncpolicywatch.com. Our founder, a lot of people may remember Chris Fitzsimon, who was one of the most incredibly talented progressive voices in our state for many years. Chris left us about 2.5 years ago because national funders liked what we were doing so much with NC Policy Watch, with daily news coverage and progressive commentary. They asked Chris to replicate the model around the country. He's now in 15 states, based out of Chapel Hill. They're just opening in Tennessee this week. They're all over the country, which is really exciting. It's a new way of delivering news. We hire frontline, first-rate journalists to work for us. Lisa Sorg's our amazing environmental reporter. Greg Childress, who wrote for the Durham Herald-Sun for many years, is our education reporter. We've got a couple other fine reporters. And so every day, if you subscribe to our free newsletters, you'll get the news of what's going on in state government, as well as progressive commentary. And I'm lucky enough to do a 1-minute commentary every night on Mix 101.5 after the WRAL news runs. I also get to do a 10-minute debate with one of the representatives of the John Locke Foundation every week on WUNC radio. So we're out there trying to, provide real, true, comprehensive coverage of the important issues that matter in our state these days. We're very proud of what we do. We're very prolific. A lot of stuff to read. We'll fill up your inbox if you subscribe to our newsletter. So,
well, I do, and I try to read everything, and it's always good stuff, and I really do appreciate it. Val, tell me what's happening with you this week. What are you thinking about, and do you have anything in the works that you're working on? Or do you have a book review? Because that's one of the things that you're good at. You read a lot more books than I do.
Well, yes to all of those. We are focusing on Connections on the legislature over the next few shows. And we are going to start off with Dan Blue. Senator Dan Blue is going to be our guest. And we are going to have an assortment of senators and representatives on to talk about an assortment of issues, because the focus is going to be on the legislature and what are they doing with all of these myriad of problems that we got. How do they see the future? So that's what's going on with the show over the next few sessions. As far as what I'm working on personally, putting the final touches on my most recent book entitled the Electoral College and the Black and Brown vote, which is very, very important. Trying to get that out right away before the fall political campaigning season starts, to give some activists and some strategists a little information that they can use to help us in motivating and energizing folks to go out and exercise their electoral responsibilities. That's what I'm working on. As far as a book is concerned, my last book that I just read and I'm recommending is a book by Jesse Wegman, and it's entitled Let the People Pick the President. Mm-hmm. And it's really a spinoff of what I'm working on, talking about the woes of the Electoral College and what we need to do to at least modify it, if not totally get rid of it. Talk a little bit about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which is a way to get around the 12th Amendment. So that's what I'm working on now, and the legislature is what I'm looking forward to in the future.
Well, great. Always a lot of stuff on your plate, but it's important stuff. And again, I want to thank Rob Schofield for being in with us today. Hopefully he can come back at some other time. Like I said, I read you nearly every day, and I really appreciate what you guys do at North Carolina Policy Watch. Of course, Val Atkinson, you can hear me on Sundays with him on WFXC and WFXK in the Raleigh-Durham market, but actually you can hear us all around the world because they stream that live 8 a.m. on Sundays. And then he's usually in here with me on Sunday afternoons for the deal with Ed Clark, and then on Wednesdays when we do our special Wednesday edition. So we're working on something for this Wednesday as well. In the meantime, I need for you guys to relax for a second. We're going to go away for about a minute, and when we come back, we got two great guests, Kimyona and Keoyona Ray. They're twins, and they're nurses that work in ER and ICU. And right now, one is in the Bronx working in a hospital. When you hear what they have to say, you're going to take this COVID-19 thing a lot more seriously. And then after that, we're going to follow up with Doctors Warachal Faison and Dr. Rohima Miah. They're both graduates of UNC Medical School. They both become psychiatrists, but they also have practice in hospital, and they got a lot to say about COVID-19 as well. Hang on, we'll be right back. You're watching The Deal. Welcome back to the second segment of The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and I'd like to thank our guests in the previous segment, Val and Rob. And, obviously there's still a lot of political issues around COVID, and we'll continue to talk about those in the weeks to come. But I did promise in the other segments today that we were going to talk to healthcare professionals. And the first group of healthcare professionals I want to talk to are some nurses, and those nurses are Kimyona and Keoyona Ray, who are traveling nurses, who are, every time I look around, they're somewhere different in America. And I've been trying to pin them down, and I finally did, and we're happy to have them on The Deal. Welcome to The Deal.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you for having us. Well, I didn't want to say it at the same time.
So I got to tell everybody, you guys are twins. So twins do talk at the same time a lot of the time. So we're prepared for that. But why don't you introduce yourselves, and maybe people can pick out your voices, and then as we go along with the discussion, tell me what you're doing right now, who you are, and what you're doing right now.
Hey there, this is Kimyona speaking. I am an ER nurse, and I am Kimyona. Hopefully, you guys can kind of depict the differences in our voices, but I am an ICU nurse, and we both have been nurses for about 5 years. Graduated from UNC Chapel Hill, and we are travel nurses, as Ed said. So right now, I am in New York, working in two different arenas. One hospital, I'm working as a kind of like a management leadership role as an ICU nurse, just helping to bed critically ill patients. And then my other job is actually working in the ICU at the bedside with critically ill patients.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I just finished, and this is Kimyona speaking again. I just finished a 8-week contract in Wilson, North Carolina, at one of the more poor hospitals there. And yes, I do work in the emergency room.
Well, Keoyona, let me start with you since you're currently in the ICU, in the hotbed of all of this in New York City. Talk to me about your real experience there, because we talked a little bit off mic before we came on. You know, I keep getting these, things sent to me online saying that there's really nothing happening in New York and that it's overblown and so on and so forth. Tell me about your real life experience as an ICU nurse in New York.
Yeah, yeah, I guess I can start with, my most current shift. Literally on Friday, I was in the Bronx picking up some per diem shifts in the ICU, and it is real life out here in New York. Obviously, this hospital in the Bronx is one of the, it's in a poor community, but in the ICU, the nurses are taking 4 to 5 patients, critically ill patients. And so for my shift, like, what does that look like coming on at 7 a.m.? I had to receive a report on 4 patients on the ventilator, when the usual ratio is 1 to 2 critically ill patients for a regular ICU nurse outside of this COVID situation. But these patients are super sick. They're on 5 to 6 drips to keep their blood pressure maintained, to keep them sedated in order to allow the body to rest. And they're sick. And, in my ICU experience, and I bet a lot of doctors can also agree and reflect on this, but the lab works and the white count and the pneumonia that they get and how long they spend on the ventilator these patients are really sick when they come in COVID positive with this virus.
Yeah.
And at the other hospital that I worked at, PPOC, looking behind the scenes at the hospital as a whole, literally 2 weeks ago, it was just a rampage of patients that came in with COVID virus symptoms that the hospitals really did not have beds for, because they can't cohort people in one room because of this virus.
Right.
And that just puts a lot of stress on the ED nurses, having to keep people on isolation in the ED. And so it's a lot going on with this COVID pandemic for sure.
Yeah. Well, Kimyona, you're an ER nurse, and you say you were recently in Wilson, North Carolina. Did you experience any people being admitted for COVID? And beyond that, as a sister and also a nurse and knowing what it's like, how are you supporting your sister who's working in this environment? Because obviously there's some sort of mental health, that you have to keep up, seeing that kind of, death and sickness.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, like I said, I worked at a smaller hospital, a more community hospital in Carolina, and it's like a 20-bed ER. And a couple days that I was playing triage nurse, see the patients when they initially come in, and I have to triage them on the severity of their symptoms. And I saw a lot of symptoms. Some of them really struggling to breathe. And it's already, when you see those people struggling, it's a bit of it's a wake-up call, but it affects you very mentally, because you feel like there's really nothing you can do as they're coming through the door. But of course, you rush them back to a room and there's a team of nurses that come and help you out with getting the patient stabilized.
Right.
But yeah, I've seen a lot of admissions in terms of people being ruled out for COVID. So as ER nurses, we do the initial testing. So we go in, we swab their nose for the virus, and then those patients get admitted. And I can't express to you how mentally draining and physically draining it is to constantly have to equip into isolation gear to go into a room to make sure that a patient is staying alive.
Right.
It's very mentally and physically toxic and draining.
Yeah.
And in terms of like supporting my sister, I'm glad that we can have these talks as healthcare providers where she can come in and share her stories with me. And I'm here to listen and just support her in that way.
Yeah.
Right. And
I want to remind the folks. I want to remind the folks you're watching and listening to The Deal with Ed Clark. I'm fortunate to have Keoyona and Kimyona Ray, who are traveling nurses. I happen to know them. I might as well tell the story. I met them when they were in high school on the track team when I was coaching track at Harnett Central High School. And I don't know if people realize this, as we've been doing these episodes, a lot of people from Harnett Central High School end up on this program, but they're all over the country. We've talked to professors at Michigan State and people all over the country from Harnett County who have gone out and done great things. And I really want to commend you two for, taking on this task of, being healthcare providers, because it's very difficult. Keoyona, let me go back to this ICU you said in the Bronx that you were most recently at. What's it like going from a hospital that has stuff to a hospital that may be challenged a little bit? As a travel nurse, you guys probably experience different environments. You go from probably really nice hospitals to hospitals that are struggling. How do you cope with that change? And do you have to nurse differently when you go to a facility that maybe doesn't have quite as much?
Yes. Wow. Thanks for that question. I think on Friday, I was actually awakened to the privilege that I have to work in good hospitals, because actually on Friday was my first experience of seeing real time of what a hospital in a poor community is experiencing in terms of having a lack of resources, a lack of staff to really help out. And I would say it's troubling. It's really troubling because you sense the amount of stress that the organization is going through just to have nurses to come on and take care of these critically ill patients. Whereas, these hospitals that have more resources and basically more money to get travel nurses or to pay staff more money to pick up extra time, it's a different feel. Yes, they're still under stress, but I feel more relaxed in that environment. I feel like I'm able to, take care of the critically ill with the right resources, the right PPE, the unit is properly staffed. We're able to get a little bit of a lunch break, even though nurses barely get lunch breaks, period, even before the crisis. So it's definitely a different lifestyle going from a hospital with a lot of resources to one that is struggling to find people to help out.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and Kimyona, I mean, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I do actually. I think that one of the companies that we work for is a bigger company that usually staff nurses to bigger hospitals.
Yes.
So their main goal is to make sure that those bigger hospitals are staffed well. And I've actually, of course, I have a lot of travel nursing friends, and they're over there and they're just sitting around like, yeah, our volume is very low here, and we're getting fed and getting all of these like luxuries, while these other smaller hospitals are struggling because they, like Keoyona said, they don't have the money to outsource, to get more of those travel nurses hired, as well as the media coverage as well. You have to look at the political, legal, social impact of all of this, because those hospitals are not really getting the attention as much as Columbia University, Columbia Medical Center in New York is.
Yeah.
You know, and that puts a lot of stress on these organizations as well, because people are not realizing that they don't have the help that they need to get through this crisis.
Right.
And I think one good example is the fact that you have found an organization that was delivering masks, right?
Right.
And they had
nonprofit organization.
Yeah, it was a nonprofit organization, and they were trying to find hospitals that they could, send some PPE to, some personal protective equipment to, for nurses, and they were like, we cannot find any hospitals that actually need this equipment. But then it's like Keoyona found me. I mean, Keoyona's my sister, so she was just like, you work at a smaller hospital. Won't you take this PPE and give it to them, because all these other bigger hospitals are like, we're okay. We're okay.
Yeah. I want to remind the folks, you're not listening to the same person talking twice. You're listening to Kimyona and Keoyona Ray, who are travel nurses who are doing good work around the country. And right now, one is doing ICU work in New York City. The other one just recently finished a stint in a smaller hospital in Wilson, North Carolina, as an ER nurse. Okay, so this is a softball question. This is the easy one, right? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you do to change nursing in light of what you've seen? You've been doing nursing for 5 years. What's missing? Because I've been in a lot of hospitals. Part of my career I spent in hospitals almost every day, putting in nurse call systems and working with physicians on how to better communicate within the hospital and that kind of thing. And technology can do some things, but what's missing in nursing, do you think, that would make it better for not only the nurses themselves, but the patients as well?
I will immediately go to
mental health support.
I think that it's so funny, because we've traveled to California and we've seen these hospitals where the nurses are a little bit more taken care of, because they have unions. They have unions where nurses can voice their opinions about what is going wrong in the healthcare system in order to get more support. And then we come to the East Coast, where most of the hospitals are not supported by strong unions to get nurses the resources. But mental health support, in terms of nurses really need a break. And organizations that can find a way to allow nurses a real true meal break and just some time to decompress and meditate from all the stress of dealing with service to the community and to patients. I feel like that will take caring for others a very long way in a positive direction.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some of these resources exist. I don't think they're prevalent, though. I think for me, I will put like on-site counselors and therapists in the ICU, in the ED settings, in these critical areas, so that when nurses, after coming off of a trauma, a critical code, whatever, they can come and, talk to someone about what they experienced, instead of holding it in into maybe seeing their therapist next week. You know what I mean? Like, we need that acute phase of, support.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead. As well as education to the community about what nurses and doctors actually do. Doctors are highly respected because, they do go through so many years of schooling, and they have this kind of big boss mentality that they are top of the chain with orders and knowledge. But nurses are really on the front line taking care of the patient to the extreme. I mean, hygiene care, feeding needs, medications, emotional support, mental support, everything.
ADLs, everything. Social work.
Yes.
Yeah. It is very extensive. And the reason why I asked that question, because I felt like you guys were going to go there, because in our next segment, I'll have two doctors on who are psychiatrists, Dr. Warachal Faison and Dr. Rohima Miah, and they're going to talk about how healthcare professionals are dealing with COVID from a mental health standpoint. And so one of the things that I think is probably missing a lot in this discussion is how do we take care of the people who take care of us, right? All of us are going to end up in a hospital setting at some point, either end of life or sometime during life, something's going to happen, and you depend on the nurse to provide that care. The doctor does rounds and comes in and it spends 2 minutes with you, but the nurse is there every hour doing vitals and all that other stuff. And that's who you have the connection with in the hospital and not necessarily the doctor. So I'm glad you guys brought that up. In the time that we have left here, I want to switch gears real quick because you guys not only nurse, you do other things too. And one of the things you do is, lately on Saturdays, you've been hosting a call where people can call in and listen to you guys talk about what you do. Can you explain what's behind that and how long you're going to be doing it and those kind of things and how people can find it?
Yes, sure. So it's funny because when Kim came to New York, we've just been constantly having in-person conversations daily, almost like 2 to 3 hours worth of talking about just kind of what's been happening in America and in the world related to this COVID crisis pandemic, both crisis and pandemic, because there's a lot going on. So we just felt like we needed a way to talk about not only the pandemic, but related topics to the crisis, to the community, and to get out information about the pandemic, as well as the effects of this pandemic on mental health and emotional health and your relationships with other people, because, people are experiencing a lot of different things in this crisis, and we wanted to have this conference call. So it's called Debrief because it's almost like nurses and doctors, after a traumatic incident happened in the hospital, we debrief, which is something very special in the hospital. So we debrief. It's a conference call we do every Saturday. And we have completed the SAC session today. Yes. And we'll be doing this until the end of June, so June 27th. So every Saturday, 2 to 3 p.m., Uber conference, you can find us talking about issues related to COVID. And, you can watch two twin sisters debate it out and debate it out. I love it, yeah. We just encourage everyone to just come in and listen to us and be nosy and stay informed with what's going on. It's both educational as well as, we have some comedy in there as well.
Yes, you do.
We want to make light of the situation, but also bring a serious side to it as well. Just like Ed said, we need to dispel those myths out there about this coronavirus not being as serious as people think it is. In actuality, it really is a serious pandemic. Right?
Yeah. I've been doing radio for a lot of years, and we have our normal Sunday program Connections on Foxy 107, 104, but we decided to start doing this additional programming so people could hear from other people and really get a sense of what this really is about. That COVID-19 is serious. People are dying. And we need to take it serious. In the final few minutes we got here, one of the things that's been troubling to me is as I go out, I wear my mask and I've been practicing the social distancing. I've pretty much isolated myself from normal activity or whatever. Talk to me about how real that is, how social distancing can help, and isn't it the other person that we have to worry about? Because I never know if another person has been exposed or not. I mean, there's a lot of asymptomatic carriers, isn't it?
I love that you hit that right on the nail. There are totally asymptomatic carriers. And I recognize that a lot in the ER setting. People will come in, even with sore throat, a symptom that we didn't even connect to the coronavirus. And, we send them out the door, and the next 2 days later they come back in, we test them and they're positive. So yes, there are asymptomatic carriers out there, which is the reason why people should wear their masks when they're in a private setting,
and keep 6 feet distance apart from each other. You just never know. You never know the status of the person that's next to you. I mean, even my sister here, right? We have to maintain different distance because I never know what type of patient she has been interacting with, as well as anybody in the community. Like, you never know what you're picking up. So protection, face masks, and gloves are they're one-time use, I would say. Just kind of using it with door handles and anything that's been frequently touched. But definitely mask protection. And keeping distance. It's so important.
And of course, washing your hands and sneezing into your sleeves or elbows, things in that nature. And if it's not for you, then think about the next man. Like, be that selfless in regards to really, putting the mask over your face to protect the other person.
Right. And especially our vulnerable populations, the elderly and those with a lot of chronic medical conditions, they are the most vulnerable. And we are doing this also to protect them. And even people with cancer, they're at, a higher risk of getting infected with this virus because their immune system is lower than an average person. So just protecting, you never know who has cancer. You never know who has chronic medical conditions. So just to be on the safe side, it's always good to, just stay protected.
Well, I'm glad you brought those things up because, again, this is a serious thing, and we all want it to go away, but it's not going to magically go away. It's going to take effort from folks to not spread it, to protect themselves from catching it, and like you said, looking out for the vulnerable populations and not making sure that they don't get exposed. We could talk for hours, but I'd like to maybe have you guys back at some point, and we can talk again as this thing progresses, and just kind of stay in touch. I also want to remind people that they need to go to the debrief. I'll put a link on with information and stuff on the webpage so you can see that. And you can find them, on Facebook and all of that, and we'll try to get all that information so people can follow up. Because I think it's important to hear from healthcare professionals, not just about COVID-19, but in general, because again, like I said, they take care of us all through our lives, from the time we're born until the time we leave here. So I want to thank Kimyona and Keoyona Ray, an ER nurse and an ICU nurse, respectively, for being on with us today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ed, so much. This was so informative and so much fun.
Yes.
Well, like
Thanks to people like you for getting out information. It's definitely needed.
Well, I appreciate you guys. Stay right there, guys. Let me tell everybody what's coming up. Again, Dr. Warachal Faison and Dr. Rohima Miah are going to be in with us. They're both psychiatrists. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be with the doctors and wrap it up in our final segment. You're watching The Deal with Ed Clark. And welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and want to thank the Ray sisters, twin nurses from originally from Harnett County, but now doing work all around the country. One right now is in the intensive care unit in the Bronx. The other one's at a hospital in Wilson, North Carolina, as an ER nurse, and they relayed their story about treating COVID patients. Also want to thank Rob Schofield from North Carolina Policy Watch, who was with us in the first segment, along with Val Atkins, former poli-sci professor at NCCU, who's always with us to talk about politics. Last but not least today, and as I promised, I wanted to talk to some physicians, and I have two very good physicians with me. Rohima, Miah, and Warachal Faison are both physicians. and they're not currently practicing in the hospital, but they're especially psychiatric. And I want to talk to them about the whole notion of why we're not taking COVID-19 as seriously as we could and some other issues. I'd like to welcome Rohima and Warachal to the deal. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, I like I said, I don't want this always to be about me just running off at the mouth, which I am very good at doing. And it's not all about politics. I want to talk about the mental health aspect of COVID-19, and I think it's being overlooked. And I'll start with you, Warachal. I just talked to some nurses who are in the thick of things, and one in particular who's in the Bronx. I know you're in the New York City area now, and you get probably a different flavor of the news and everything. But I want you to talk also as a physician too. How serious is the outbreak in New York, and what are you seeing from your vantage point as a physician? What are you thinking as you see these stories about these healthcare professionals who are struggling to take care of patients?
So I'm based in Jersey City, but I work in Manhattan, and fortunate enough, I've been able to work from home these past several weeks. And so as you and Rohima know, this is one of the epicenters, if you will, in regards to COVID-19. And so with that, we've seen cases and deaths just skyrocket in this area. My heart goes out to the healthcare workers and all of the other frontline workers who are essential to the rest of us surviving. And with the healthcare workers, I just can't imagine. Vincent, you described the nurse who's had to deal with multiple intubations in her work period. And we're hearing those stories over and over and over again, where these healthcare workers are seeing patient after patient die. I've heard of stories in which nurses and doctors are going from one intubated patient to the next, to the next, to the next, throughout their entire shift. So it's very troubling. I mean, one can only imagine the stress, the anxiety, the depression, the anger, if you will, in regards to our healthcare system really not being equipped with everything that's going on. And I mean, quite honestly, none of us would have ever anticipated that this would happen in my lifetime. I know there have been bouts of other viruses before and other plagues, if you will, but in my lifetime, I wouldn't have expected to see anything like this. And so our healthcare systems are really, really, having a difficult time. If you think about it, some of them don't even have enough masks. They don't have a protective mask for some of these healthcare workers.
That is a horrible thought, that you're having to go in. It's like going into battle without a gun, or at least without bullets. Rohima, as a psychiatrist, as a practicing psychiatrist, you talk to people all the time that are going through some trauma or whatever. Can you imagine what the trauma is going to be for these healthcare professionals after this is over? And how do we get to a point where we might even be able to help them? Can we help them in the thick of this? Talk to me about what's probably going to happen afterwards.
Well, I think there are some resources out there already here in North Carolina. I know the North Carolina Psychiatric Association has been doing some online self-care meetings every week where you can call in and do that. But I think a lot of people are going to be traumatized, and unfortunately, and I think this happened in New York, there was actually a case of a physician suicide. Mm-hmm. So it is very traumatic. And I think it's the disconnect, I think, for a lot of physicians or people in the healthcare community about the belief that our healthcare system, as they used to like to say, is quote unquote the best in the world, and then seeing how dramatically has failed, not only for the patients, but for healthcare providers not having these resources.
Right.
We spend twice as much money than other countries. We spend all this money, yet somehow the resources weren't available when needed. And that's a huge disconnect from what I know when we started out in this field and practice what we were expected. We were expected to be able to have these resources, to be able to take care of ourselves and take care of our patients. And all of a sudden, in something that we should have been prepared for. There was actually a CDC actually had a whole pandemic, preparation kind of committee that was disbanded under the current administration. But unfortunately, the CDC and a lot of agencies were chronically underfunded even before this administration.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully this is an opportunity for us to look at the current situation and then maybe change the trajectory of how we deal with healthcare in this country.
Yeah.
We're going down one path about how we thought it should work, and maybe now this helps us rethink that path. Should it all be about how much things cost, but to a certain extent, how much we need? And can we shift some priorities in our national budget and our state governments, our local governments, so that we're using more of our dollars to provide adequate health care for providers and patients? So I think there's going to be a lot of trauma among healthcare providers and patients and families not being able to be there for their dying loved ones because of the situation, people losing jobs that they didn't expect to lose, people being told they have to work under conditions that are not safe, and that goes for healthcare providers and others. And so I'm hoping that this can be, as one of my favorite authors said, a portal to a change that we want to have. Is this gonna be a portal where we go through and make a different world and not just go back to what we had, because what we had obviously didn't prepare us for this.
It's not working, right? Yeah. I want to remind the viewers and listeners, you're watching The Deal with Ed Clark. Fortunate to have two physicians with us, doctors Rohima, Miah, and Warachal Faison. We're talking about the mental health implications of COVID-19. I think it's been largely overlooked. We've been doing a lot of countings, Warachal, on the numbers. 65 dead, 1 million plus infected, probably more of both of those numbers than we can imagine. But we're not testing at a rate that will yield, I think, real numbers. So that doesn't really matter at this point because I don't think the testing's there. Right. However, and I think we talked about this a little bit offline, is people not taking it serious enough. I was out today. I had to go to the grocery store. I've been going once a week. And I saw a lot of people here in the Raleigh area without masks, not adhering to social distancing and that kind of thing. And I got out of the grocery store as soon as possible. Let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about what people are doing. And we even saw protests downtown in Raleigh with people with guns demanding that we open back up. What's going on with people in their heads about not taking this serious, Warachal?
So I think some of it is that there's a lack of understanding, what this particular coronavirus is and how it's spread. I mean, I think fundamentally that must be a disconnect. And what we know, so first of all, let me step back so that I can make sure that all of your listeners, Vincent, are on the same page. So coronavirus is a very common virus. There are different types of coronaviruses. For example, the virus that causes the cold that many of us get every year, as well as the flu, are caused by coronaviruses. This particular coronavirus that causes COVID-19 is a new type of coronavirus that has been identified. And the specific name is SARS-CoV-2. So when we talk, when we sneeze, when we cough, if we have COVID-19, even if we are asymptomatic, we can spread the virus by talking, by sneezing, by coughing. Respiratory illness. So that is why it's so important that we, and I don't like to use the word social distance, probably because I'm a psychiatrist. I prefer physical distancing. That's why it's so important that, we're 6 feet or more apart from each other so that, we can combat that spread. And then wearing a mask that's covering, the nose and mouth area is really a second layer of protection to decrease that spread. And, like I mentioned, I've been working from home for the past few weeks, and yesterday was the first day that I walked outside of my building. I've just been, trying to stay in and behave, having groceries delivered. And like you, Vincent, I was shocked. I've seen the reports about people partying, and I guess I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was shocked by people walking by me with no mask on. I mean, and it's just a simple thing. And I mean, and even if you don't have a mask, you can wear a scarf or a bandana. When I had to go downstairs to get my groceries when it was delivered, that first week, I didn't have a mask either. I had to order, but I found one of my scarves and wrapped it around my nose and my mouth. So I'm really concerned about that. And I tell you, in particular, in regards to the African American community, we know that health disparities already exist, right? And these health disparities are rooted in years, from a historical perspective, oppression and structural racism that was going on pre-COVID. And with COVID, realizing that people with certain medical conditions, for example, hypertension, diabetes, asthma, obesity, are more at risk. Guess what? African Americans are more at risk for developing those same conditions. And so that's why we're seeing COVID disproportionately affect our community. And so I get pissed off, really, when I see these videos that have been going viral on social media.
Large parties and gatherings and stuff.
Yes. Because we need to be safe. We need to do everything we can to protect ourselves and our families.
Well, Dr. Miah, I want you to jump in here and give your assistance.
So I totally agree with that. And just talking about the health disparities, and sort of like I mentioned before, it's happening in the Black community more because of the historical differences. But it also, if you look at Native communities, same problem. They're being affected at a much larger rate. And a lot of people, and even those communities, don't have access to running water. They don't have access to internet. They don't have access to electricity. So it sort of exposes stuff that's already been there for years in our society and sort of pointing that all out. Part of it too is because of the historical disparities between the majority community and marginalized communities. Most people, many of the people that are considered essential workers are in these communities. They're Black people, they're Latinx people, they're Native people, they're immigrants. So the very people that have been marginalized and haven't have access to good resources, whether it's financial or health or anything, are now being asked to be on the front lines without adequate protection or financial resources. And I think in part what's happening with all these people that are going out there not doing what's been recommended is that we're getting mixed messages. So I've been happy about how our governor here in North Carolina has handled this. He's been looking at the science and he's planning a slow opening, but then you can see the variability across the country, right? You know, and coming from the feds, that, you know, in one conference, you know, the president of the United States is saying one thing and then the medical people are saying something completely different.
Yeah, that is scary though, when the president is trying to give medical advice.
So it's too much mixed messages. There's, you know, some governors and some, you know, some people are like really looking at the science and trying to be safe, and other people are just doing things that have nothing to do with that. And so I think the average person may literally just be confused about how to handle this.
Yeah.
And Rohima,
right.
to your point, because something that I'm grappling with today, in New Jersey, our governor has opened up as a first level. He's opened up. He said that it's okay for golf courses to open as of today. He also said as of today, it was okay for parks to be open, as long as people maintain social distancing, etc. And one of the things that they've decided to do as part of that mandate is, for example, they're reducing parking at the parks by 50% to kind of inhibit a lot of people being there at one time. But what he did, Rohima and Vincent, which I'm just trying to figure it out, he said masks were not mandatory. And I just was like, why, you know? And Rohima, I think it just goes to your point. Mixed messages. We know this is respiratory. So why not say, hey guys, we're going to continue wearing masks. It's very important to do that in addition to physical distancing. It's blowing my mind.
Yeah, so
and I think it's been a failure too of our national government, Congress, and the president to recognize that so many people are suffering financially, and I think that's what's driving at least some of these people to say we need to open up things. Now, maybe not all of them. Maybe some of them have some ideological reasons for why they want to do what they want to do. But I think there are some people literally just suffering, and they don't know how they're going to pay their bills, and they're thinking, I need to go back to work. And unfortunately, what was passed did not really think about those of us, you know, people with the least money and the least amount of resources. And we already knew that, you know, more than half of Americans don't have enough money to survive anything, you know, $400 in the bank at the most. And now they're in this situation where they can't earn a living. And we haven't even talked about like homeless people, you know, people in prisons, people in jails, people in ICE detention centers, and just a complete failure of the system to consider not only their lives and their responsibility, but the people that work in those places.
Right.
Go home to their families. So, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's a lot of weighty subjects that we could deal with here. And obviously, you know, in 20 minutes is not enough time to fix the world. We try every week, but it never works out. We always have to come back and do it again. In the time we have left here, obviously, I want to thank you guys for taking time to come in and talk. I think it's important to start having conversations beyond the political, because, you know, I think sides have been drawn, right? The people think that the president's not doing a good job, want them out. People who think the president's doing a good job, some of them are carrying guns around saying we better open up. You know, there's a wide range of people. What we need to get to, though, is some solutions and to help people through this thing. I'm going to throw a softball out for both of y'all and take a few minutes to talk about. But I have been in the House by myself for 35 days now. And so I know that, not having any personal contact and all that kind of stuff starts to weigh on people after a while. I've talked to funeral directors who've had to do funerals without people being able to touch each other or be around their loved ones in such a way where they could only let 10 people in, or they had to do a graveside funeral and people had to stand 50 feet away to watch that funeral. What is that doing to people? I know we talked about there's going to be trauma for people who've been working in the ERs and ICUs, but what about a person like me, or people like some of my friends who've lost loved ones who haven't been able to mourn those folks? And either one of you could take that.
No, I mean, having good social connections is essential to our physical and mental health and our physical health, because it's been shown not having good social connections is dangerous as having a high BMI. It's essential. And so I'll agree that we need to focus on how do we deal with that. If people are fortunate enough to have some access to technology like we have here, that's the one way to stay connection. The phone still works. I actually even suggested to someone, you could go back to old-fashioned letter writing. That would help. Just some way to keep those connections going. As we've seen in some communities where you're closer to your neighbors. I know this may be happening more in the New York, New Jersey area, where people can see each other out of their balconies or windows or something and make some kind of connection. But I think that's essential to helping get through this. So I'll agree with you that it's not just individuals in the healthcare world, but also just average people in their homes trying to figure out, how do I keep those social connections?
Yeah,
we may have to go back in time.
Right. Yeah. Dr. Faison, we'll end up with you. And you got any assessment of how things are going to look for those people who are struggling right now with some loneliness and those kind of things?
Wow. So I think, just piggybacking on what Rohima said, trying to reach out to others is really going to be key. I mean, most of my family lives in North Carolina, so it's been very, very difficult. I'm fortunate enough that we can call each other on phone, FaceTime, or Zoom. My mom is 84 years old, and she experienced her first Zoom meeting a few days ago when my niece turned 25. It was very difficult. Who would have thought that we wouldn't have been with each other to celebrate my youngest niece's birthday, but we still were able to have that experience, via Zoom. And I think, at least for me, it's been interesting because in many ways, even though I haven't been able to see friends and family, person to person, face to face, in person, in many aspects, I feel more connected now with this technology, because we're doing virtual parties every week. So that has really helped me, because like you, Vincent, I'm up here, by myself. So that has been very, very helpful. And yes, Rohima, the other week I ordered some stamps, a bunch of stamps, by the way, and they arrived yesterday, and I was putting stuff in the mail today. So I think all of those things are just going to be very important. But I must admit, Vincent, that what I think has been just so tragic is people who haven't been able, because of COVID-19, to see their loved ones in the hospital and to be able to say goodbye. I just, I was having a conversation with my mom about that the other day, and that's just, it's unimaginable.
Yeah.
It's unimaginable, with, families, spouse, couples that have been married for years, and they're not able to say their goodbyes in person.
Yeah. Well, it's a really somber time, and like I said, we're going to have to talk about this a lot more. There's no easy answers to any of these questions, but I do want to start getting prepared for the next phase of this. There will be a time when there's less disease, but there's going to be some aftershocks from it, and there'll be people like Dr. Miah and Dr. Faison who are going to help us through this as psychiatrists, and that's why I wanted them on. But people should know that psychiatrists are also physicians, so uh, they know about what goes on in the hospital as well. Obviously, we wanted to have people on as well, like nurses, like the Ray sisters who are in ICUs and ERs dealing with people on a one-to-one basis. And then earlier in the show, we had Rob Schofield from North Carolina Policy Watch and Val Atkinson from North Carolina Central University. We're trying to round out these discussions and have real talks and not just screaming matches between the sides, because that's not going to solve any problems. So I want to thank Dr. Miah and Dr. Faison for being with me today.
Thank you for having us.
No problem.
Thank you for having us.
And please come back. I know this is not going to be over anytime soon. Can you hold on right there? Let me wrap this up. So you've been watching The Deal with Ed Clark, and like I said, all our guests. I want to thank all of them for coming in today. We're working on a new show for Wednesday. We're always trying to find guests, and we've been getting people from Ohio and California and New York and everywhere. We want to talk to people all around the country. And hopefully we'll be talking to some people from around the world. I'm working on a guest from Ireland to talk about what they're doing in the UK. Awesome. And please share this with folks. Sometimes there's not very meaningful conversations going on because they're political conversations or right or left conversations. This is a people conversation. That's what The Deal is about. So join us on Wednesday night. We usually post a new episode Wednesday at 8 o'clock. And then we're back here on Sundays for The Deal, Sunday edition. And then hopefully you were with me this morning with me and Val on Connections on Foxy 107, 104. You can always find us there. And then, of course, all during the week, I'm writing during the week on our blog on thedealwithedclark.com. In the meantime, what I always tell everybody to do is do something nice for somebody during the week. And I really do mean that. Do something nice for somebody. And then be back with us Wednesday for a new edition of The Deal. Have a good Sunday.